Hello and welcome to another one of our 088 online training sessions. Thank you very much for joining us. So this session is on tracking. Tracking is kind of one of those. It's one of those terminologies that's thrown around a lot in the world of lighting. But there's a lot of kind of a cloud around what it might mean, and we regularly in our 088 console training sessions come across a lot of people that aren't quite familiar with what actually tracking is all about, other than this idea that it ruins all of your cues and things like that. If you're coming from this from completely fresh, never heard of it before. That's kind of quite a nice position to be in, actually, because it means you can start to learn from this from afresh without any kind of preconceptions of what tracking might be. So let's dive in. My name's Edward Smith, product specialist for 088. Let's take a look at what we're going to look at today. We're mainly going to be looking at my screen here, which is showing Phantom ZerOS. Okay, so Phantom ZerOS, that is the software that can run on a PC to allow you to emulate any of our consoles that run the ZerOS software. So at the moment you can see here I am running as a Flex. I'm running this the software as a Flex console. I am going to be running this as a Flex. As we go through, we are going to see tracking in action using Flex on PC. But most of what we go through today is also going to be applicable to most other theatrical lighting consoles. Pretty much any lighting console that says it has tracking behaviour, you're going to be able to apply this kind of logic to that as well. So probably the best thing to do is kind of dive in and just start to do a little bit of programming as we go through and just start to see this tracking behavior start. And it's worth mentioning right at the start, tracking is the logic that the console uses when you program cues, not when you play them back. Kind of a subtle difference, but it's worth mentioning it's not the way that you're playing back your cues, and therefore if you change this, what we call tracking option, that we'll talk about in a bit, if you change this tracking option, you're not going to be affecting how your cues are played back, but it's actually this process of how your cues are stored in the first place, if you like. Okay, we're streaming live right now to YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. It's great to have you with us if you're watching live. Do put any questions you have, any kind of notes in the comments, okay, and I'll be able to get them through to myself, and I'll be able to take a look at those and answer any questions you've got live. So we had a comment from someone on YouTube. They've just come in and said, I'm in the category of people who know the theory of tracking, but are many years of kind of just living in what we call cue-only programming. And which is actually a kind of a camp that a lot of people live in. It's this idea of, I've kind of heard of it, but actually I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to dive into its functionality right now. But what we're going to do is we are going to explore some of this functionality. So let's take a look. And first things first, as I've said, I am going to do a bit of programming. We're going to program some really simple cues so that you can see from afresh how tracking will affect us. So first things first, and I really am going to be very basic with our lighting states. I'm literally going to just, for now, work off of channel faders. Not going in even as complex as syntax. We're just dealing with channel faders for now. And so all I've done, I've pushed up channel fader 1, and you can see in my output window that has therefore turned light number 1 onto full. It's on 100%. As we go through, we are going to be actually seeing some different colours in our output window here, and so I'm going to mention those as we go through as well. If you see a red value, a red intensity value has the highest priority on the console. Okay, and if you're used to using the Flex consoles, you'll be quite familiar with this way of working. And if you have red values in your output window, no cue is going to be able to grab control of that particular light's intensity, because essentially you have told the console as an operator, that you want that fixture to be on full in my case here. And because I've done that manually with the channel faders and not with a cue, that value is therefore going to stay at that level until I change it with my channel faders. No cues are going to be able to change that value. So that's all we mean by our red values. It's just these high priority values. It's what we call programmer values. That's kind of the proper terminology for it. We would say that this value is in this particular fixture is in the programmer. So that particular fixture there to full, I'm then going to go in and tap record. That's going to open my record options window on the external touchscreen. I'm not going to go too in detail in here right now. We will be going more in detail kind of in the second half of this session in some of the options we've got here. I will just mention though this row of buttons here, which is our tracking options. Now of course tracking, that's exactly what we're talking about today. By default you will be in queue only. Okay, by default, this is what you will see if you buy a brand new Flex or you factory reset a Flex range console. This is what you will be in by default. Something called Smart Tag and something called Queue Only will have a red stripe. Okay, so by default, you don't need to understand what we're talking about in this session. Okay, you don't need this kind of this pre-known knowledge, if you like, prior to using a Flex console. You don't need it because by default it does live in queue only. But of course, for the purposes of today, we are talking about tracking. So I'm just going to pop it in track forwards for now and continue. So I've tapped record, and I'm now going to go and store this onto my master playback. And there we are. I can now see in my queue list window, I have a single queue, queue number 1. For queue 2, I'm going to have this light off. So I'm going to pull its fader down. I'm going to push the next fader up. So we've now got light 1 is going to go off, light 2 is going to come on. Great, I'm happy with this. So I'm just going to repeat that process. I'm now going to go and tap record. And I'm then going to go and tap my master playbacks button again. And that's going to now go and store that as Q2 onto my master playback. Okay, I'm just going to repeat that again. Again, as you can see, I'm keeping things simple, but I could be including colours, beams and positions right now. That's absolutely fine. I'm just going to deal with intensities because it's more obvious. And I'm going to record that one in. Again, to record Q3, took light number 2 off, put light number 3 on. I'm going to program in a Q4. This time though, the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push fixture 4's fader up. So the only thing I'm telling my console here, the only thing I'm interested in right now is adding in light 4. And therefore, of course, right now on stage, I have lights 3 and 4 on. Okay, so great, I'm happy with that. This is what I now want to become my Q4. So let's go ahead and record that one in. Q5, I'm going to now take light number 4 off. I'm still going to leave light number 3 in. I might need it in for whatever reason. I'm going to go and add light number 5 in. Okay, and I'm going to record that then as Q5. Like so. There we go. And that'll do for now. That will do for now. We've got a few cues programmed in there, and so we'll leave it as that for now. I'm just going to have a quick look. I've had a comment come through. Again, someone from YouTube. Thank you very much for the comment. Let me just have a quick read of that. One of my issues is knowing where something I've added has tracked to, which cue the next instruction, or when the block happens. Also, which cue do I go back to find where a channel has given its instruction. Let's take a look at that in a bit. And we'll go through the process of answering that. So right now, I'm going to go and play back these cues. I'm going to play back our cues that we've programmed in. So I'm going to pull my faders down here. I've now got a load of red zeros on stage, so it's kind of as I alluded to a moment ago, I need to get rid of these red values to allow my cues to play back. So to do that, I'm going to go and give a tap of my clear button, which will clear out those red values. And I'm now going to go in and I'm going to raise my master playback's fader. We're now in Q1. Okay, we're in Q1, and as you can see, our fixture there in Q1 is now displayed in a blue value. So a blue value, blue is coming from a Q. Okay, simple as that. I'm going to now tap my Go button to go into Q2, and you'll notice, of course, fixture 1 is going to fade out. And that's, of course, because we told fixture 1 to go off, fixture 2 to come on. You'll notice that fixture faded down in a green value. A green value is a value that has faded down. Okay, so a little way of remembering that is blue is up towards the sky, green down towards the grass. Quite a lot of other lighting consoles from other manufacturers share that colour coding as well. Okay, so that's just one to be aware of. There's kind of a little bit of similarity between some different console manufacturers on that colour coding. Let's just take a look at that again. Again, same process. When I went from when I programmed Q3, we took light number 2 out and added light number 3 in. So again, we got that same thing of light 2 fading out in its green value, and then we had our fixture 3 fading in blue. Let's go into Q4. So I'm going to tap my Go button, and of course the only thing we did when we programmed Q4, the only thing we did was add in light number 4. We didn't tell light number 3 to come in because it was already on. Actually, physically, when I use my channel faders over here, all I did was add in fader number 4. Okay, because of course fixture number 3 was already on. We didn't need to tell it to come on, it was on already. And that's what we're seeing here with our purple colour coding. So if you get a purple colour coding, it means a fixture is doing what it was doing already because it hasn't been given a new instruction. It's just remaining doing what it was doing already. And that is a tracked value. What we're seeing right here is a tracked value. Okay, the reason fixture 3 is on is because it turned on in Q3. That's when we added it in the first place. And we haven't told it to go off because we needed it on in our Q4 as well. And so it's just remained on, and that's what our purple value is referring to. Similarly, let's go to Q5. Same thing happens. Again, I still had fixture 3 on at 100%. It remains on at 100% in purple. It hasn't been given a new instruction, but this time fixture 4 fades out and fixture 5 has then been added in. And this then comes to kind of the really useful tool for where we can really usefully use our tracking. And that is, say really, my really basic example here, Qs 3, 4 and 5 are all different lighting states in a scene of my show. But I realise for all of that scene, I actually need fixture 3 to be a little bit dimmer. I need fixture 3 to be a little bit dimmer throughout all of those cues. So first things first, I'm going to go into my Q3 there. Go into the Q3, kind of the first lighting state in that scene, if you will. And I'm going to use a little bit of syntax right now. You could use the channel faders, doesn't really matter. And I'm actually going to type into my console right now, 3 at 75, enter. 3 at 75, enter. Okay. And there we are. That's now changed that value from blue to red. So it's gone from being a value stored in the queue to a value that I've done live. And now to store that in, I want to say, okay, well, I've got my edited lighting state. What I've got on stage right now, I need to update this lighting state. And this fixture at 75%, that is now going to become my cue number 3. So to store that one in, I'm going to go and tap my update button on the console. And I'm now going to go ahead and tap my master playbacks go button to store that in. Notice the colour when I do this in my output window automatically changes from red to blue because the console stored anything that I'd gone in and manually adjusted. That has now kind of been all grabbed in and stored into that queue. Happy days, we have updated Q3. let's go into Q4. And some of you might have second guessed what's about to happen. And if I go into Q4 right now, fixture 3 is still at 75%. And of course, that is using the logic that we've learnt about so far. And that is because when I programmed Q number 4, the only thing I did was raised fader number 4. I did not tell the console what level I wanted fixture 3 to be at, because it was on already. Okay, I didn't need to tell the console for that light to come on, it was on already. But now I've gone in and updated the queue that introduced that light, these changes have indeed tracked, and it's using that terminology, tracked. And so I've updated my Q3, and that change has therefore tracked through into Q4, and you guessed it, it's also tracked into my Q5. Okay, because neither Q4 nor Q5 gave an instruction for that light. Okay, and so it's tracked in. And so now, in this prime example here, I've been able to update many queues all at once. I've updated a single queue, and that has automatically for me updated several queues at once, because that change has tracked through. So whenever you see a purple value, essentially we're saying that value is on from a previous queue. That value is still remaining on from a previous queue. So if you adjust that previous queue, that is going to probably be affecting queues further down your queue stack. Now, it's worth mentioning, if I told fixture 3 to go off in a queue, or I told it to go to a specific instruction, it will still go to that instruction. That is really important. That is worth mentioning. Okay, tracking will track through until that light is given a new command. Okay, and then it goes to our new command. Let's look at this a little bit of a different way, because I'm just going to go and really quickly open a very quick spreadsheet I've made. I don't want to bore you with a spreadsheet. All it is it's just showing us this tracking in action, and it's using our color coding that we've been used to. So I can see right here, Q1 brings in these two lights here at these levels. Okay, Q2 and 3 doesn't adjust the levels of light 1, and so it tracks through. Okay. Similarly, in Q2 though, light number 2 was brought down to 25% in my example here. However, this fixture here was told to go off in Q4. At the point of programming Q4 in my example here, light number 1 was told to go off. And therefore, if I go and update Q1, I could go and maybe change its value to 75. That value will track through, but it's not going to just aimlessly track through right through all of every single one of my queues. It can't do that because queue number 4 has a hard value for that particular fixture. Okay, so it cannot track through into Q4 because Q4 is telling that light to go to 0%. Okay, and that's exactly what we saw happen on the Phantom software. Now, equally, if I were to go right now and add a value into light number 3, we have just gone in and added a value to all of my subsequent queues. All of my subsequent queues now have this light in because I haven't given that light an instruction in any of my other queues. I wasn't using it, and therefore I hadn't given it an instruction. So if I go and dive back to my console, let's kind of do that example together on the actual console. Go to Q1, and let's say that I want 6 at, and I'm going to go right now and update Q1. Because I'm updating with track forwards, as we can see, because none of my other queues had a command for light number 6, it has indeed tracked through to all of my subsequent queues. Okay, tracked through all of those queues. Now, in some cases, that can be really useful, because some cases you might want to be able to update a single queue but be able to actually affect and change several lighting states all at once. But of course, there are scenarios where actually in Q1, I just want to add light number 7 in on its own in just Q1. Okay, Q2, I want Q2 to go back to being whatever I'd programmed it at. Whatever was present at the point of programming Q2, I want it to go back to doing that. So this time, I'm going to go and make my edits. I'm going to go into the queue I want to adjust. I'm going to make my edits. I'm going to go and tap update. But this time, I'm going to do it as a queue only update. So I'm going to go in and I've made my edits, tap update, choose queue only, and I'm now going to go and tap my playbacks button. And I've added this light in, but as the name suggests, only into that queue. So if I go into Q2 right now, it takes it back out. Now, what are we actually seeing happening there? Because let's just very quickly flick back to the spreadsheet. If I were to go in and add a light in, but queue only, what your console is doing is it actually doing this. It's saying, okay, I'm going to add that light into this queue here, and I'm then going to take it straight back out again. So if you update in queue only mode, actually behind the scenes, your console is updating 2 queues simultaneously. Yes, of course, it's updating the queue you're in right now, but actually the next queue, it's having to go in and it's going to kind of revert the changes back so that you get the lighting state you had originally. So in this case here, if I'm updating Q1 to add that light in, it's actually gone in and told that light to go back out in Q2. And yep, that is exactly what we saw happen in our real life scenario here. I added it in Q1, and Q2 has got a green value because that light is being told to fade out to 0. Okay. A comment from Jason from YouTube. Thanks very much for the comment. Surely in your spreadsheet, Q4 light number 1 should have a value of 0, but be no value. That's just me being lazy in the spreadsheet there, Jason. Yeah, so that is actually a 0 displayed in there, you can see. But I've just done a very quick formula to say if there's no value, if it's a 0, display as a black. So yes, you are right, it is a 0 value in there. But that is actually how our ZerOS software works as well. If you give a value of a 0, that value will be hidden. It keeps things nice and neat. So you are exactly right. Right now in Q2, there is essentially a 0 under Q7, but that is hidden to keep things nice and neat. Okay, because otherwise you would end up with it peppered with a load of zeros. So in ZerOS, and other lighting consoles might vary, but in ZerOS, to keep things nice and neat, we do tend to hide zeros. Yep, so similar. Someone else has put the same comment as well. So yeah, just to make that clear, that value is being given a 0. Okay, but it's just the value is hidden in the spreadsheet, and the same thing on ZerOS as well. We hide zero values. So I hope that clears things up for the guys on YouTube. Thanks very much for the comments. Very worthwhile. So that is what we're seeing. So we can see there that yes, tracking is very useful. It allows us to upload a load of queues at once, but we also have this queue only function as well, and we can use queue only if we only want to adjust a single queue in one go. Now you saw there, of course, I need to be especially useful with my tracking option or queue only option when it comes to updating. Okay, because of course when you're kind of programming stuff out of order, you need to be very aware of what you might be going through and tracking into. Same thing also goes for if you're inserting a queue. Okay, because if I were to right now go and say I want fixture 10 at full, and I want to go and record fixture 10, and I want to record this as queue 2.5. So I'm going to go and record this in as queue 2.5. When you're inserting a queue, you also need to be careful with your tracking option. Okay, so if I were to go and say this was a track forwards update and I'm recording this as a new queue rather than updating, so I'm record 2.5 and I'm going to go and tap my master playbacks button. I've stored this in as a Q2.5. So I'm going to go into Q2.5. There it is. And of course, now it's been introduced. Because I did it as a tracking queue, it has then tracked that value through. If I'd have done it as a queue only, as we've learned already, the console would have been a little bit clever, and it would have actually done a kind of behind the scenes update on Q3 as well, and taken that fixture back out. Okay, so that is our tracking options, and that is also queue only. Now, there are some scenarios where you will know that you do not want values to track into a particular queue. Okay, so let's say I'm in this queue here. I'm in Q5, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and use a shortcut on our console of enter. Enter, that is a really useful shortcut to select anything that's currently on. And I'm then going to go and say enter at dot, which of course is giving me a blackout. I'm saying anything that's currently on, go off. And I'm now going to go ahead and record this as my blackout. To prove that's worked, double tap clear, so I'm back into Q5, and I'm now going to press go to queue into Q6, and I got myself a lovely blackout. If I go back up to the top of my queue stack, and I'm now going to go in and add in a fixture 11, and I'm going to go and update that queue with track forwards on, because maybe I want it through all of these queues. I'm going to go and update that. I'm now just going to snap through some of these queues, and yep, happy days, it's added into all of these queues, lovely stuff, lovely stuff. I've now got this fixture on in a blackout. So I've added it into all of my queues, exactly what I wanted to do, but it's now come in a blackout. So what can I do? I've got kind of a couple of options. First things first, I could of course right now go and just say at dot, take that light out, and then update and repair my blackout queue if I wanted to. Okay. Or I could have been a little bit more clever when I programmed my blackout queue. Because remember, when I programmed that blackout queue, what I did is I said anything that's on, go off. And what I could have said instead is everything, go off. And that is what we would refer to as blocking. Again, that's one of those terms you might have heard of in the lighting world. But blocking is another technique that we can use to, as the name suggests, block the tracking behaviour. So I'm actually going to go and I'm going to delete Q6 right now. So I'm going to go and just type in on the console delete 6, and I'm going to go ahead and say yep, get rid of Q6. And at the point of recording Q6, rather than doing an enter and then turning everything off, so rather than saying everything that's currently on go off, I should have said everything go off. Whether you're on or not, I don't care. Everything needs to be off in this queue. Okay, and there's a really useful thing that we can do for that. And rather than going in and doing a enter at dot, I need to go and say every single fixture go to 0. And there's a really useful bit of syntax that we can do for that. And that is a 1 through at dot. 1 through at dot. I'm just going to temporarily make my window a little bit smaller, just so you can see my command line. Let's go and make that a little bit smaller. So that is my commands that I've typed in. I've gone and typed a 1 through at dot. And I've gone in and said right there, everything, fixture 1 through to the last, go off. Okay, and that's what we've got happening there. So now I've got everything given a red 0, 1 through at dot. I'm now going to go and record this as my blackout Q6. Okay. So I've now recorded my Q6 as a 1 through at dot rather than an enter at dot. Kind of a subtle difference, but worth noting. And yep, right now, happy days. I've got my my Q6 takes all of those lights off, and just to prove that I'm that is indeed correct, if I go and right now add in a brand new light light number 12, haven't touched that light at all in any of my queues. I'm going to add that guy in. I'm going to update that into queue number 1. And I'm now going to go and snap through all of those queues. Yep, it's added that light into all of these queues, Happy days, it's in all of my scene 2 of my play. But it's then going to go off in my Q6. Okay. And so that is a really useful tool, because it means that if I do a 1 through at dot, tell everything to go off, it will not come on. Okay. Just had another comment on that one. How can you tell if a... let's just take a look at that one. Yeah, so that's just one to be aware of, is that when you go in and what we got the comment from there is, how do you know whether you've got a value that's told to go off or not? You can actually go to preview. And if you go to preview, you will get a preview of what that value is. So preview will show you values at 0. Okay. So that's just worth mentioning. How do you know whether a value goes to 0 or not? Go and take a look in preview, and that will show you. In live though, zeros are nice and tidy and they're hidden away. Okay. Now, what else have we got when it comes to our tracking? What else do we have available to us? I'm just going to go and delete Q6. Delete Q6 there. And you might be thinking, okay, well, we've got our record options here. What else can we use? Well, there's one option in here, which is our snapshot. Okay, we've got a snapshot option in here. Okay, so what's that going to do? Well, right now, if I go and take my master playbacks fader down, I'm going to do a snapshot. Now, the shortcut for snapshot is a shift record. Okay, so you can either tap record and then choose snapshot, or you can do a shift record. And right now, I'm going to go and store this as a Q6. Okay. And what snapshot does is it will say, right, whatever my fixtures are doing right now, that fixture is going to go off. Whatever your fixtures are doing right now, those fixtures are going to be stored into that queue. So I have gone in, and I just really lazy there, and I took my master playbacks fader down, and I took a snapshot in Q6. So if I run through my queues, I'm just going to run through those queues there. All of those fixtures go off in Q6, because at the point of snapshotting, all of my fixtures were at 0. So you might be thinking, okay, well, what's the difference between snapshot and a 1 through at dot instruction? Okay, well, a 1 through at dot tells just intensities to go off. So if you do a 1 through at dot and record that queue, you are telling all of your intensities to go off. If you do a shift record or a snapshot, you are grabbing everything. And there's a little clue to this here. I can see that colour, beam and position has been stored as well. Okay. And that's really important, because what we've also got running in the background of these consoles, and you can kind of see that little bit of text just at the bottom of my screen here, we've got something called Move on Dark happening. Now, we've covered Moved on Dark in some of our other sessions, so if you want more detail on that, go and check those other sessions out. But basically, if a fixture goes to 0% and the console has no instructions for colour, beam or position, it will go, right, well, I'm not using this particular fixture. I'm going to prep it for when it's used later on. I'm going to go and prep it. I'm going to prep its colours, get its beams and positions ready for when it's used later on. Okay, so Move on Dark will just do that. It will be whirring away in the background, and it will be trying to prepare things for when they're used later on. But if you go and snapshot a queue, and you store a queue as snapshot, you are telling the console whatever colour, whatever beam, whatever position information you are doing right now, that needs to be stored into the queue. And so right now, if I had a Q7 that had these lights back on again, the console couldn't prep the colour, beam and position. Okay, because instead of getting them ready for the next queue, they are being told, the console has been told, whatever my fixtures are doing right now for the colour beam and position, you must go there. Okay, and so you have essentially stopped move on dark happening in this particular queue. No prepping can happen. So rather than doing a snapshot, I'm going to go ahead and delete Q6. So I'm going to go and say delete 6. Rather than doing a snapshot, and you can do a snapshot, that's absolutely fine, instead go and say a 1 through at dot, which is saying all of my intensities go to 0, and you can record that with your track forwards. That's absolutely fine. Record that cue. Okay, and then you're telling only the intensities to be blocked. Okay. And so again, let's do that example again. I'm going to add fixture 13, a new light into that queue there. Fixture 13 in. Update my queue number 1. Happy days, it's been added into all of those queues as we've seen already. But again, that fixture is then told to go off because we did our 1 through at dot. We told everything to go off. So we've talked about a block queue there in that case. A snapshot, that's going to tell everything, whatever everything is doing right now to go to those values. A 1 through at dot, that tells all intensities to go to 0. But what about if we want to just block the intensity of a single fixture? And we've got a good example of that kind of over here. And let's say that, yes, Q3 added in my light number 3 at 75%, and that value then tracked into Q4 and Q5. But let's say, actually, this fixture in value number 5, I always want fixture 3 to be at 75%. Okay, I don't care what's happening upstream of that queue. I want fixture 3 to always go to 75%. So I'm going to go and say right now, 3 at 75, enter. It goes from purple to red, but the value hasn't changed. Okay, it goes from purple to red, but the value hasn't changed. And I'm going to go and update that queue there. Again, with track forwards on, that's fine. And I'm going to go and update that queue. And notice we're seeing a new colour here. You might have noticed this colour earlier on as well. We're now seeing a white intensity. Okay, and if you see a white intensity, that is a blocked intensity. That one light's intensity, the tracking has been blocked. And all that means, as we've seen, is that value is told to do something that it's doing already. It's told to go to the value that it is at already. Okay, so it goes from purple to white. Okay, and that means if I go into Q3 now, and I now update Q3, and let's have that fixture back up to full again. Turn him back up to full, and I'm going to go and update my queue there. Again, with track forward still enabled. And I'm now going to go into Q4, and it's now a purple 100%. It has updated my Q4 for me because it's been able to track through into that queue. But the tracking got blocked by queue number 5. And so it's now going to that hard 75% value. It's not displayed in white anymore. It's now displayed as a green because white, remember, that means it's told to do something it's doing already. Okay, but now it's actually having to come down to 75%. And so therefore it is displayed as a green. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So we kind of got this difference. So if we got snapshot, we've then got the option to block intensities using our 1 through at dot is a prime example of recording a blocked blackout. And then we can also block individual fixture intensities. I know this fixture is going to be at this value in this queue. I don't want anything upstream to affect that. So essentially you're giving it the value that it's at already. Okay, you're telling it to do something it's doing already manually. Okay, and so that gives you the option to block your individual queue, the individual fixture in that queue. I hope everything we've gone through so far makes sense. If you've got any more questions, do keep them coming in the comments. Let's talk about some of the other options that we've got available to us. Okay. And so what else have we got available to us? I'm going to go into Q. I'm going to go into Q5. And let's say, oh, actually, all of this scene would have been better with lights 11 through 13 at 50%. Okay, so well, to update that, as we've learned, I could go into the go in and update that right at the start of that scene and let that tracking just ripple on through. Or if I am indeed at the last scene of that, if the last cue of that scene, I could go in and do 11 through 13 at 50 enter, update, but then go ahead and choose track backwards. Track forwards is kind of usually you're just toggling between cue only and track forwards, but we've also got these other options here, track backwards and track both. So if I do this as a track backwards update, and I go ahead and update that cue, notice here we're seeing something quite interesting. We're seeing a value go straight from a red to a purple. Okay, so that is essentially saying, yes, those values have been stored, but they haven't been stored directly into this queue. And so if I go back up this queue stack, yep, still purple, 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 and the console's gone in until they were introduced. And it's actually amended the values where they were introduced. So I was able to go in and update Q5, but actually update Q1 at that point in time. So that is a really useful tool to use, saving you having to go back and find the queue that introduced that light. Actually, just update the queue you're working on right now and do it track backwards, and the console will do the legwork for you of working out what queue introduced that light. Now, equally, as you saw in there, I did also have a track both directions option as well. So I could go and say, actually, those fixtures at 75, update, track both. And it's going to send that value, yep, up the queue stack as far as it can, and it's going to let it track down the queue stack as far as it can as well. Okay. So that's those tracking options. Worth mentioning, when you tap record or update, it will open your record options on the external monitor. If you don't have an external monitor connected, press and hold record or press and hold update, and it will open it in your internal touchscreen. And that will allow you to open this window. So we've talked about our tracking options in here. So that is where those values are going to get sent. We also mentioned our snapshot. And I've kind of briefly mentioned Smart Tag, okay, but let's talk a little bit more in depth about what Smart Tag is going to do for us. Now you'll notice if I enable Smart Tag, all of these bottom options grey out, okay, and that is because when Smart Tag is enabled, the console isn't just storing the values that we have manually adjusted. Okay, so with Smart Tag disabled, so that's a blue stripe meaning disabled, only values that we adjust will get stored. Okay, so that's intensities we adjust, that's also using our encoder wheels when you're moving an encoder, or we use a palette, and the background of that parameter goes from a dark blue to a lighter blue on your encoder displays. That means that value is tagged. It's what we call tagged. And again, red intensity percentages also mean tagged as well. And so by default, if you have Smart Tag disabled, only tagged information will get stored. Nothing else will get included. Okay. Now, the downside of that, of course, is if you want to say, okay, well, I want maybe fixture 36 and 37 at that level there, but I also want to add in a little bit of my previous lighting state as well using my playbacks. Yep, the whole lighting state on stage, I want to store that. Well, using our Smart Tag rule, if Smart Tag is off, we are only recording the values I've adjusted manually. So right now, with Smart Tag off, I am only going to be storing these fixtures here. Okay, and so if I wanted to include the whole lighting state, I can use Smart Tag, and that's a really useful tool because the console's going to go, well, yes, you had these fixtures tagged, but you also were using this playback here. So I'm actually going to automatically include those values for you as well when you record that cue. Okay, so there are very much pros and cons of Smart Tag. The pros, of course, yep, you're going to record the lighting state, whatever is on right now is what's going to get stored. On the other side of that, though, there are many situations where you don't want your playbacks stored into your cues. The prime example is house lights. You might want to put house lights up on a playback, but you don't want those house lights getting included in your cues, in which case you want to live with Smart Tag off. And that way only these tagged values, only these manual values are going to be getting included, not the values from other playbacks. Now, another benefit of Smart Tag, another thing Smart Tag will do, is if a fixture is at 0%, it will ignore it. Now, you might be thinking, well, why would I want that? That, again, is a really useful tool to allow Move on Dark to work. Okay, because of course if a fixture is at 0, all the console will care about if you've got Smart Tag enabled is that the fixture go to 0. If it has colours whirring, if you've got kind of colours tagged, if you went and said red and then told the fixture to go off, you have got colours tagged right there. But if Smart Tag is on, the console won't care about that, and it will just instead include the fact that the fixture is at 0%. Okay, and store the fact it's at 0 and not include colours, beams and positions. And that means as soon as that fixture goes to 0, the console is able to prep the colours, beams and positions for when that light is used next in the cue stack. Okay, so Smart Tag is kind of a really helpful tool. Yes, it's going to be including other playbacks for you, but it's also helping you out with ignoring fixtures at 0% and things like that. Again, flip side of that, there are scenarios where you do want to say, yes, I know my fixture is off and it has 0% intensity, but I do want it to be in this particular position. Again, in that case there, record that cue, but with Smart Tag off. Now, with Smart Tag off, because you as the console operator are defining what's getting included, the console's not kind of including extra bits and bobs for you. With Smart Tag disabled, it means you have these extra filters in here as well. So you could go and say, okay, well, actually, I only want the fixtures that are currently selected to be getting stored, rather than any fixtures that are tagged. Okay. And then similarly, you can start to go in and use these attribute filters here. So you can say, okay, well, right now, I am recording any tagged fixtures, and I'm only storing their intensity. Okay, because it's got a red stripe. Now, what these stripes mean, if it's a blue stripe, it won't be getting included. Okay, now, right now, the only thing I did with these fixtures is I told intensity to come on. Therefore, that process has not tagged any of the other attributes. So they remain blue. They're not tagged. If I were, I'm going to cancel my record command. If I was to go and chuck a little bit of colour in there, I'm just going to use my palettes on screen. Tap record, now colour does have a red stripe, okay, because it's now saying, okay, well, colour is tagged, so that is, of course, naturally going to get included. I can manually force stuff to be included if I want, so whatever beam is doing right now, I can go in and include it if I wish to. Tap it again, and it will go green. Okay, now if you get a green stripe on these attribute filters, it means everything about that attribute will get stored, no matter what it's doing. Okay, so beam shape is kind of a prime example of that. I'm going to tap record to cancel. By default, if I move one beam shape control, notice how only that parameter gets selected. If I go to a different parameter, go and tag position, you'll notice how all of those parameters go to having a blue background. All of them get tagged. Okay. Well, in this case here, yes, I've only moved one wheel, and so only one parameter has got tagged, but actually I might want to go and force everything in Beam to get stored. So I can make it go green, get a green stripe to store everything. If I tap again, it will cycle me back to the beginning and then say actually go to having nothing stored in a tool. Okay. One last thing to kind of mention on the kind of the tagging side of things. If you go to your, I'm going to open my internal touchscreen as a separate window just to make it a little bit bigger. If I go to my Z window, I have an intensity wheel right here. Okay. If you go and click on the middle button of your intensity wheel, that allows you to tag or untag intensity. Okay, so using that middle button of that encoder, it allows you to tag or untag intensity. So that allows you to choose whether intensity is going to get stored or not. Now, it's really important to be aware of, no matter what you go in and choose to tag or manually tag or untag, if Smart Tag is enabled in your record options, the console doesn't care about what you've manually tagged or untagged. Okay, it is going to be storing the values you've adjusted and the values from coming in queues. Okay, hence why, as I mentioned, this filtering is grayed out. Okay, but if Smart Tag is off, it is up to you what you're going to be including. Okay, as we mentioned right at the start of the session, the default is that. Okay, the default is Smart Tag and queue only enabled. Okay, so if you're fresh to the console, you don't need to worry about any of this tracking behavior, and you're kind of safe in the knowledge that whatever you've got on stage right now will get recorded. Okay, but you can go and use that really powerful tracking tool and go and disable Smart Tag, and then you have a little bit more control of what you are actually getting stored into your queues. Something that we kind of sometimes get asked as well is, okay, well, I've got queue only selected here, but it says tracking enabled at the bottom of my queue list window. Okay, tracking enabled in your queue list window on the external screen means you have access to these tracking options. That's all it means. Okay, it means you have access to the tracking options. Okay, if I go into setup on my console, and I go to settings, and I go and say tracking options are set to queue only, and I go and exit setup now, this will say queue only at the bottom, but I don't have access to the options. Okay, now actually what's happening in the background, I am forced to Smart Tag enabled and queue only enabled, and I can't do anything about it. Okay, so you can kind of see this a little bit like admin privileges is a nice way of looking at it. If you're in global queue only mode, you do not have access to those options in the record options. Okay, but what you can then go and do is the best way to work, and it is the default option, the best way to work is live-in tracking options enabled, which is the default. By default, you will still have queue only selected, so when you update a queue, you will only be adjusting the queue you're in, but tracking enabled, it just purely means you have access to those options. So if you kind of have that moment of, I can actually update a load of queues at once by using my tracking technique, it means you can just come into your record options and choose your tracking option. Okay, you don't have to go into setup and give yourself access and then access the record options. Okay, so yeah, the best way to work is make sure you're in global tracking enabled, unless you don't want that option to ever accidentally be changed. Of course, that's why you do have that global option. But if you do sometimes want access to the tracking option, live with it enabled globally, but then you can choose your option within here. Okay, last thing to mention as well before we wrap up, when you delete a queue, you also need to be aware of the option within your record options window. Okay, you need to be aware of the option within your record options window, because if you delete with track forwards, you're going to be deleting that fixture's value from that queue, and of course any of the other queues that value had been in, that value had tracked into. Okay, whereas if I was to right now go and delete Q1, for example, that introduces most of my tracking happening. Okay, if I go and say tap my record options, make sure it's a queue only, okay, and I then go and say delete Q1 from that queue, and yep, I want to delete it, it means that Q2 is still exactly how I programmed it. If instead I were to actually go to my record options, choose track forwards, I'm going to then tap record to then save and close. If I were to then right now go and delete Q2 and say yes, those values have now been deleted from the rest of my queues, okay, because of my tracking option. Okay, so that's one really important to be aware of when it comes to deleting queues as well. Last thing I would like to mention is the option to remove a value from a queue. Okay, so I can remove the value from a queue if I wish to. So right now, let's go and say that I want 10 at again, and I'm going to update that queue. I'm going to do 10 at. I am going to go and turn smart tag off so that I can force that queue to take that value. And it goes to from purple to white. Of course, right now, whatever I update further upstream, that fixture is definitely going to be going to 100% in my Q5 because it's got a hard value. It's got that tracking being blocked. If I want to remove that value from this queue, what I can do is I can use the update remove function. So if you tap update, there is a remove button within the update options. Okay, that option is also present in the record options as well. And so what I can do is I can say, okay, well, I want to say everything about that fixture needs to be removed from this queue. Okay, now the easiest way of tagging everything, telling the console that you want everything to be removed, is to home a fixture. Okay, so if I right now, I'm going to go and say 10 home to say absolutely everything about fixture 10. I'm then going to tap update and choose remove. Okay, and when you go and choose remove, you are going to be removing anything that was tagged. Okay, remember that term tagged is anything you've adjusted. And because I homed that fixture, I essentially tagged everything about that fixture. So I'm saying update remove from Q5. And it then goes back from white to purple because it is now, that fixture hasn't, that queue has now removed all instructions for that particular queue. And so now it is on because it's coming from whatever queue introduced that particular fixture, which was my Q 2.5 in this case here. Okay, if you want to know why is a fixture on, why is fixture 10 on right now on the full size flex, you can go and hit source. Okay, and if you hit the source button, it will give you a little code to tell you where that fixture is coming from. So yes, I'm in Q4 right now. 4 is green in my queue list window, but I've got a little code in there saying 2.5. And that is because this fixture was introduced and is tracked from Q 2.5. Okay, so the source button will help you out. These row buttons along the top are only available on the full size Flex. Okay, on Flex S they are not available. And that is everything I wanted to say. So apologies if I've gone over anything too quickly. I hope I've explained that in a way that's kind of easy for you to understand. If there's any last minute comments, do chuck them in pretty quickly, and I can grab control of those. I can take a look at those. If you're watching this back after the session's been live, if you're kind of watching it back on YouTube after this session, and there's any questions you have, do just still leave any comments or drop us an email and we'll be able to get back to you and answer any questions that you might have. So yeah, I hope you found that useful. I haven't had anything yet. Oh, I've got a comment incoming, so I will. I'll before I wrap up, I'll wait for that comment to come in. But yeah, I hope you found that useful. Do check out some of our other videos as well if you'd like any more information. and we can cover those. Really good last kind of comment from Jason on YouTube. What are the grey zeros? Okay, what are grey zeros that we're seeing? That's kind of the last thing that we haven't spoken about in our output window, actually. If you see a grey background with a black zero, that refers to that, meaning that that fixture has moved on dark. Okay, so the console has gone, well, I'm not using these particular fixtures in this queue, but further down my queue stack, I am using those fixtures, so it's been able to prep the colour, beam and position ready for that queue. Okay, so if you ever see a grey background with a black zero, it means those fixtures have been moved on dark, they've been prepped for when they're used later on in the queue stack. Okay, for more information on Move on Dark, do check out our controlling fixtures session as well on that one. Okay, so I hope that answers I hope that answers that comment there. Okay. Great stuff. Well, I think that's all of the comments so far. So thank you very much for joining us for this session. As I said, any other questions, do let us know. Drop us an email. That's not a problem. And yeah, I hope to catch you for one of our future sessions. Thanks very much for joining us. Take care.